Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening. All right, welcome to tonight's special program honoring CHM's 2022 Fellow Award honorees. Thank you for joining us. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Daniel Lewin. I'm the CEO of the museum. I'm used to saying that I've been here for about 4.5 years, and half the time we've been under the shroud of COVID. So this is a wonderful occasion to be back in person. This is a special event for us and for all of you, so thank you for that. After these past 2 years, our institution has emerged, frankly, stronger than ever. We took advantage of the crisis and turned it into an opportunity. We've been expanding on our new mission and purpose, and we've been focusing on the broader scale of technology to shape a better future. And since the last time we had a program like this in this room, it's really only been 3 or 4 months that we've reopened the building. We're seeing significant return of guests, about 85% of the traffic flow that we had typically had prior to the pandemic. And without Chinese tourism, that's not so bad because there's not a lot going on between China and the US right now, as you all know. The other thing we've done in the last couple of years is very exciting, is we have taken advantage of the technology that is available. We launched a game on Roblox for children and kids, and in just about a month's worth of being in the market, we've had 1.5 million kids participate with the program. And so scale is in our future. We're excited about that. And we're focusing them on solving real world problems. We're really focusing on technology to solve fundamental issues in society, which is key. And we're hosting events like this in person, which is great, but we're also streaming, and we've got a broad and growing worldwide audience that we're very pleased to be tracking and paying attention to. And so, as I said, the institution has changed and evolved its mission. We will continue to collect and preserve for humanity the artifacts and stories of the computer age, but we've turned our attention to decoding technology, the computing past, the digital present, and the future impact on humanity. And the vision and purpose is to shape a better future. It can't be about the computers anymore because life doesn't exist without computers. It's a little bit like a Starbucks moment in coffee. You know, it's every day we live and breathe, computing exists and we exist. So it really has to be about computing and the implications on people. And we'll continue, of course, our historical and very impressive collection, which is unsurpassed in the world. Now, tonight's program, we're going to be honoring 4 computing pioneers. And one of the most important ways that we will celebrate our agenda and our new mission. Because, as some of us were talking about in the lobby a little while ago, people were the original computers. And that wasn't long ago. In most of our lifetimes, that was the case. So now that we're here today with life not existing without computing, this awards program takes on a very special purpose. And the question, obviously, is who are the pioneers and the visionaries? What motivated them? And how can they inspire us? What's the story that motivated them to do what they did that presents them here tonight as a fellow awardee? And so let's take a moment and just peek at the screen and take a look at some of the 92 fellows that we've honored and celebrated over the last 3 decades.
In the words of Dr. Katherine Johnson, and I quote, "You are providing a platform for so many to share their story, and together we are rewriting history in a way that allows everyone to see their place."
For more than 3 decades, the Computer History Museum has reserved one honor for a distinguished circle of individuals who have advanced the field of computing.
So I figured that if I could start on the ground floor with other people, then I'd have a chance to get ahead.
And that was what led me to write the first compiler back in 1952.
And it was set up as a crusade rather than to make money.
The CHM Fellow Awards recognize technology pioneers, legends, and unsung heroes who have illuminated our world and propelled humanity forward.
The semiconductor industry has made bigger changes in a few decades than printing has over a few centuries.
When these things actually start to connect, you get the wow effect.
Democracy, freedom, prosperity, they all stem from technological innovation.
We've got to make a society that will last, that is sustainable as a society.
That's one of the reasons I developed my computer and gave it away. I wanted to help that revolution go forward.
If every one of us does our job well, it'll all go very interesting.
When the ideas start, they are fragile and they're new. And most people don't understand them. And the things that are fragile need to be protected.
They are the dreamers who imagine beyond what is, the disruptors who challenge convention, the builders who transform our world. They are the history makers who inspire us all to keep exploring and creating new ways to shape a better future for everyone.
It's a terrific story, isn't it? We are you know, in my short tenure here at the museum, this is just one of the highlights for me, is just celebrating the people, and we're very, very proud of this program and those who participated and received the award. So you might ask, how do we figure this out? How do we select the fellows? And the nominations are open to the public. And we are looking for a diverse range of viewpoints and very broad criteria by which the implications and impact and work can be considered under the rubric of computing. And in the end, the selection is made by a committee that includes historians, researchers, a series of industry leaders, staff, and then past award honorees as well. So we appreciate that. And tonight, I can look around the room, and I'm excited to say that there are 4 past honorees in the room tonight. Very exciting. I see Ray Ozzie over there and Don Knuth. And who else do I see over here? I see Whit Diffie and I see Elvie Ray Smith. You know, there's a lot of interesting people in the room and probably quite a few online as well. So let's give them a hand too. Thank you. All right, let's focus on what we're going to do tonight though. Our 2022 Fellow Award honorees. So let me pose a few questions for all of you. Could you imagine using your phone or a computer today without a graphical interface? I don't think so, but you may remember when you did. Have you ever watched your favorite entertainment on a flat panel display? It seems like most of them are pretty flat these days. That's a good one. And then how about those millions, and I believe there may be on the order of 85 million people who write code on a daily basis, or at least get their hands on it. And 4 out of 5 of them are dealing with object-oriented code in programming environments these days. It's pretty amazing. And then how about children, and what have they done and engaged with computing to learn new things and explore new worlds? We need some more of that, and we need to guide them in the right direction. And then again, how would we do any of these things without connecting to the internet? And how many times a day do you do that? And it turns out that our fellow award recipients tonight have contributed on all of those fronts. So first Don Bitzer for his pioneering work in online education in communities with PLATO and for co-inventing the plasma display. Adele Goldberg for the promotion and co-development of the Smalltalk programming environment and for advancing the use of computers in education. Dan Engels for the creation and co-development of Smalltalk language and the programming environment. I think just every single version has got your fingers in it as well. And then Leonard Kleinrock for his pioneering work on the mathematical theory of computer network and the role in the beginning of it all at the ARPANET and expanding to the world as we know it today with the internet. So it's really exciting to see this come together, and I'd like to thank the committee and the staff and everyone that brought this together, and encourage all of you to give a nice warm round of applause to our honorees. And programs like this don't happen just because they oftentimes, and in this case, invariably, have had tremendous support from our sponsor and partner, Accenture. This is the 9th year that Accenture has made this program possible, and we can't thank them enough as both a sponsor, but more importantly, as a strategic partner. We've been collaborating with Accenture over the last several years that I've been here to begin this new journey on our mission and purpose, and starting to think about this institution, because if not us, who, how we start to think about the use of technology in a way to reach people everywhere in the world on the devices and in the places and in the languages that they choose to engage with. So we're very grateful to Paul Doherty, who's the trustee of the museum and also the group chief executive of technology and the CTO over all of Accenture, who's on our board. He's an active board member. And the entire team that he's brought together to help us on so many different fronts at so many different moments in time. And with special appreciation to Tom Sturmer, who is here tonight and has been an incredible point person and partner for us. He's a global managing director at Accenture, and I'm going to ask Tom to come on the stage and say a few words. So thanks, Tom.
Thank you. And first, I just want to start with, isn't it great to be here together in person? So, Daniel, thank you so much. And I'm thrilled to be here among so many of us who support the Computer History Museum. In the celebration of these remarkable men and women who are innovating at the very edge of technology and human ingenuity. And as Daniel mentioned, Accenture's own Paul Doherty, proudly represents us on the Board of Trustees. And unfortunately, he wishes he could be here tonight. His personal engagement on the East Coast where he lives. But he's enjoying the celebration virtually. And I will tell you that, we all extend our appreciation for every one of you who support the museum, and congratulations for the incredible contributions of the fellows that are represented in this room. I am thankful and honored that I get to represent Accenture today and on our decade-long support of the Computer History Museum and the CHM Fellows Program. We're also pleased that our work at the museum over the past few years has really enabled this to become a worldwide event, not just those of us in this room. Our very presence here today, whether in person or virtually from all reaches of the globe, it speaks to the resilience, the brilliance, and creativity of the human experience among these extraordinary times that we live in. With last year's unveiling of the museum's digital twin, we have shown that we can create an experience special and unique that enables interactions despite distance, technical, timing, and constraints, and other obstacles that we have in being able to interact physically. And the work we're doing together on the open CHM platform will truly make this museum's extraordinary collection accessible to anyone, anywhere, in any environment. Such work rests upon the shoulders of those that came before us. We could not have weathered challenges and disruptions like we've experienced over the past few years without their contributions. And so how appropriate and essential is it that we take the time to celebrate and thank them? And maybe that's what I'm most proud of and excited about today. I get to brush shoulders and, of course, honor these individuals, the giants of industry, of inspiration and imagination. As Daniel suggested in his opening remarks, without the fellows we honor, the world would be a very different place, or perhaps it would actually be the same very stasis place. Never moving forward, never innovating, and never improving. Where would we be today without our fellows? Where would we be? We'd be on basic coding languages. We wouldn't have flat screen TVs, right? We'd be educated with pencils and paper. We'd only be able to get our groceries in person, perhaps, and see TVs in theaters. And enjoy concerts only by standing in a physical location, instead of having the opportunity to do it virtually. So thank you, Don, Adele, Dan, and Leonard. Because of you, we are living in extraordinary times. Finally, let me thank all of you for your support of the Computer History Museum. The CHM's mission to provide the continuity across the human computing past, the digital present, and the future impact of technology on humanity. is even more critical to those of us working in technology today. It's certainly aligned to Accenture's vision to deliver on the promise of technology and human ingenuity to solve some of the world's biggest challenges and improve the way we live and work. So again, it's thanks to the work of the CHM Fellows who have given us an amazing world at the present and something to dream about in the future. So thank you for your support of this program and for your ongoing support of the Computer History Museum. Back to you, Daniel.
Thank you. Great. Thanks so much, Tom. We really appreciate it. So now it's my pleasure to introduce my co-host for this evening. She's part and has been part of the museum and the development and launch of many innovations and new products from large companies like Accenture, for example, to Visa, Sun Microsystems, Qualcomm, and others. She's also a member of a small group of investors and has been involved in entrepreneurial ventures from the beginning at places like Tesla, DNA Direct, Packet Design, and Zoox. So currently, she's a general partner at the venture capital firm Playground Global, and she also serves as a trustee here at the museum. So please join me in welcoming Laura Yoler to the stage. Thanks.
So, Daniel, I am so thrilled to be with you tonight to celebrate the 2022 Fellows. I love the museum's tradition, built over the last 35 years, to honor these amazing people. It's important for CHM to continue to shine a bright light on their work and impact and preserve and share their remarkable stories. It's equally essential to examine the relevance of their work for us today and to inspire the next generation.
So it is a special night, and we're going to build on the legacy of the Fellows Award program. And with your experience, I couldn't have better co-hosts, so I'm going to get off the stage and let you begin the program. All right. Thanks for joining me. Bye.
And for the audience, speaking of joining, I wanted to add my warm welcome to each and every one of you for joining us tonight. You are certainly an important part of this story. So also, please feel free to add your voice by joining the conversation on social media using the hashtag CHMFellows. Now, I will begin the presentation of the awards. This evening, I'm honored to introduce our first 2022 Fellow and to share some of his amazing accomplishments. When networks like the internet were still a research lab curiosity, Don Bitzer's multi-user PLATO system served as a dress rehearsal for what we do on those networks today. Learn, teach, collaborate, chat, email, play games, and more. PLATO's courseware language and touchscreen multimedia terminals previewed features that would follow decades later. PLATO was a postcard from the future of online communities, and its example would help make that future real. Don Bitzer's life has been driven by a vision of computing for everyone, in which social or economic status would no longer be a barrier to obtaining an excellent education or learning a new skill. Early versions of PLATO delivered courses to a small number of students using expensive hardware. PLATO needed a cheaper graphical display device to reach a wider audience. Bitzer and two colleagues invented the plasma display to meet this need. It was also the first practical flat screen. He has devoted his life to research and teaching, joining the faculty at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, then starting in 1989 at North Carolina State University, where he is currently Distinguished University Research Professor of Computer Science. Drawing from CHM's oral history program, let's hear more in Don's own words.
I always enjoyed working with young students. I had students from high school, undergraduates. All of them were very bright. The dean had written a letter to the head of the laboratory I was in, asking what could be done with computers now for helping with education. And I said, we got the equipment upstairs to immediately connect to the iliac. We can get things going. I said, give me 2 weeks and I'll have a terminal up running for you in the mode we're talking about. We put the thing together. It worked right off just like we wanted. We had a lesson material running on it within a month or so. We had a psychologist in the laboratory. He wanted to know if the material excited the student when they sat down. We wire them up, and lo and behold, when we sat them down, the second they saw the material, their heart rate doubled. 1 second. It was just fantastic. So we put the multiple terminals up. We grew slowly from 4 to 20 to 80 to 100 and then up to 1,000 and maybe several thousand. And we ended up with thousands of lessons written by the professors themselves because anybody could program that wanted to. And we made it possible for them to do it. We knew we needed a display that had its own memory, you could read on and write, see through the project images, all that had to be in it if we wanted to really get moving. And that's what led to the plasma panel. Students had a choice. They could take the regular course or take the course in many courses in chemistry and physics on PLATO. The students frequently chose the computer, which surprised me, but doesn't anymore. And most people did not view computers in education as being very important. If you kept your eye on the computers, you knew that eventually that was going to be the winner.
Don and the impact that he's made on the world of education and as an ever-curious inventor, I'd like to introduce Dr. Mladen Vok. Mladen is North Carolina State University's Vice Chancellor for Research, overseeing all research activities, including $335 million in programs sponsored by government and industry, and more than 1,000 US patents. Mladen is a computer scientist, an IEEE Fellow, who has received the IEEE Distinguished Service Award, the IEEE Golden Core Award, and the IFIP Silver Core Award. Please join me in welcoming Mladen Vok.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure and a privilege to be here today as we honor pioneering contributions of Dr. Don Bitzer. Don is a fantastic colleague, teacher, researcher, mentor, innovator, team builder, extraordinary storyteller, and above all, a great friend. The first time I met Don was in 1989 when he joined NC State University's computer science department. I was working on a computational problem when Don, unexpectedly, stopped by my office and introduced himself. He asked what was I doing, and I explained, and he said, I think I may be able to help. And he did. In a few days, the problem was resolved. But then he said, well, now can you help me with a problem I'm working on? And here we are 30 years later. Working with Don is addictive, and his ability to tackle the most difficult problems with a smile, extensive creativity, and gusto is invigorating. One of Don's and my favorite research and development areas is impactful teaching and learning, how to effectively and equitably transfer knowledge to students by matching their personal learning models and context. That work has been especially rewarding. For example, for personalized learning, students need, among other things, reliable, on-demand access to an appropriate and adaptable learning environment and materials. PLATO, later Novanet, provided that. But motivated by the advent of the web and this access need, in 1995, we developed an automated web-based system for live in-class capture of lectures, things like video, voice, text, slides, and for synchronous and asynchronous delivery of these lectures. This web lecture system was in use for the next 10 years. In 2003, we took this a step further. Driven by practical course delivery needs at NC State and inspired by the motivations that Don had when he developed PLATO and Plasma, that of serving the learners, we invented an open source cloud computing environment called Virtual Computing Laboratory, or VCL. It was designed to deliver reliable, network-based, on-demand access to a variety of operating systems, platforms, and applications, including, for a while, access to Novanet. VCL was one of the first academic production-level clouds, and it started delivering its services in 2004. Today, it still continues to serve numerous learners. Don's approachability, interest in discussing good ideas with everyone, regardless of rank or age, his enjoyment in solving problems, and his leadership and vision in developing new products has been transformational for me, NC State's Computer Science Department, and the university in general. Don, you are a true Renaissance man, as well as a research and education wizard. A huge thank you and congratulations.
Thank you, Mladen. What a wonderful tribute to Don. Now, to present Professor Bitzer with the 2022 Fellow Award is Ray Ozzie. Ray fell in love with PLATO in 1975, and since then he has devoted his life to connecting people with computers and building collaboration tools, from PLATO educational software to the iconic Lotus Notes. In 2006, Ray succeeded Bill Gates as Microsoft CTO and Chief Software Architect, leading the company to develop the Azure Cloud Service and helping to define the modern digital workplace. Ray started several companies, including Iris Associates, Groove Networks, Taco, and most recently Blues Wireless, to focus on Internet of Things communications. Ray is also a 2021 CHM Fellow. Please welcome Ray Ozzie.
Thank you. It is so great to be here. I couldn't be more excited than to honor my friend, my former leader and mentor, Don Bitzer. Back in 1974, when I was an undergrad at University of Illinois, a biologist and software development lead named Paul Tenzar hired me as a systems programmer for PLATO. As I got to know Paul and his boss, Don, and so many others on the project, I was struck by how this lab that Don had created had become a mecca for bright people from all walks of life, grade school kids, undergrads, researchers, educators, scientists, engineers, deep technologists, and people. It was an incredibly diverse environment, the common denominator being that everyone felt or portrayed themselves as a builder, each having their own idea of how they might contribute to this amazing product and project that we were all working on. I think we all sensed that PLATO was one of a kind. We were so close to it, I don't think we understood quite how different and ahead of the curve it was. But what an opportunity in the 70s to see and feel interactivity, particularly with people at a great distance, and online community. It was tremendous. Terminals across the country, people around the world, terminals in unusual places like military bases, prisons, and so on. It was fascinating. Don provided leadership, vision, funding, protection, permission to build. Culturally, it was encouraged and almost expected that each of us, even undergrads, create our own audacious goals for the things that we were working on and rally others to achieve those goals. And above all, that we persevere until we could either take that idea all the way through to failure or to success. Each in our own way was encouraged to achieve some impossible dream. Great leadership means strong followership, and how Don attracted such a following was pure magic. Quite literally magic, as Don was a founding member of Local 236 of IBM, the International Brotherhood of Magicians. It's true. Everyone meeting Don knew that he was a serious and accomplished engineer, but whether facing an audience of one who's being recruited or a skeptical audience, maybe in DC to obtain taxpayer funding, or an audience of the rest of us on the Phil Donahue show at the time, he delighted in mesmerizing and impressing others with feats of what appeared to be technological magic. His magnetism, his eternal optimism was contagious and always apparent and inescapable, and remains so to this day. Don Bitzer, from all of, whoops, I was looking here where you were. Don, from all of us who you've inspired over the years, thank you. On behalf of the Computer History Museum, it's a distinct honor to present you with the 2022 Fellow Award for co-inventing the plasma display and for pioneering online education and community through PLATO. Congratulations, Don.
Well, thank you all very much. I tell you, I owe a lot of thanks to the museum people here. They did so much work at getting things together, and it was so much fun to work with them. We were here in 2010, I think, with the 50th anniversary of the PLATO system. About 150 showed up. And this museum has just absolutely expanded in every way possible to put in the history of how computers happened, which is getting more important every day now. The terminal, what we were after was more than just the teaching part. We wanted to be able to not just teach, but do anything else that we wanted, and we decided that we needed to have a terminal that had the ability to be sensitive to touch, be transparent so you could show pictures to the back, inherent memory, so it didn't have to flicker. You could just write on it or erase. Very low data rates when you did that. It worked out very well. Had slides that you could project from behind, had audio you could record on or play back, and we imagined this is what we really needed to go in the future. And so we started on it. Eventually, we got it all. Just very briefly about that, because there are a lot of things that you have to watch out for. When you have a terminal like that, you've got to be very careful because you've got different multimedia in it. And the only time I really remember getting excited was when CBS Midwest used to put the election returns on the screen for everybody in the Midwest. And in order to get them so they could do it easily, the panel, you didn't have to worry about flicker, intermediate flicker. It was a panel that wrote something like 500,000 or more times a second on the screen with every dot at the same time. So there was no way of reading it by scanning, listening for the scan signals, which made it very nice for if you didn't want your information to get out. And it made it possible to do all kinds of new things. Well, just briefly the story about that, sometimes that's dangerous. My wife was teaching nursing. Now, we had about 10,000 hours of lesson material, which some of them were hers. And so we had a terminal at home with all those features. She liked sitting there and writing her program, and she did a very nice job on it. And she had the terminal with the slide projector and all this stuff on it inside. Well, when CBS called us, every election returns that they reported, they would call us up and say, we need a PLATO terminal tonight to get the program out. And so they come over to the lab and get one. Well, at about 5:30 that day, they called up and said, the terminal we grabbed and picked, something's wrong with it. We need another one. I said, well, the best thing to do is we got one in the home here. Just come over and pick it up. And they did. And everybody rushed around. And they got it, and they put it on. And after they left, I turned to my wife and I said, did you bother to take the slides out? She said, no. I said, well, what were you writing on? Oh, she said, I was describing maternity nursing. And she said, the slides for teaching that are quite vivid. So we turned on the television and watched until election returns quit, hoping that no error would come through and select one of those slides and the whole Midwest be exposed to seeing election returns covered by maternity nursing slides. We lucked out. But it was an interesting experience to go through all that. I also like to thank all the researchers who were involved. I didn't do this alone. I did this with hundreds more than that of people. We all knew each other in those days because we all attended the same meetings and presented our results, the latest results. We helped each other. We visited each other. It was a really group operation, different people contributing in different ways. And the people I had at the laboratory, they were terrific. And they were young. They could believe anything, try anything. And I was gone traveling a lot, so when I see them, I have to get their attention quickly. And I use my magic ability. I show them a new trick, and then they paid attention after that. But one of the things that's really needed, there are two things. One is very important. First of all, you have to have inspiration to do something. And you also have to have perseverance, because the museum teaches those two, because you can see the things and you can understand that they didn't just appear overnight. That even after the ideas came out, it took years to develop until everybody got into society. And that still continues. 80 years ago, many inspirations had to come from the comic strips. There were two I particularly remember when I was very young. This is about the time during the end of World War II. And I was old enough to read comics. And one of the comic strips was Buck Rogers. I don't know, probably very few people here remember Buck Rogers in the comic strip. But the people were traveling by rockets. It was really fantastic, particularly if you're a child looking at it. Of course, later that became things like Star Trek, where new things were shown and like. It was very inspirational, as well as didn't appear overnight in science once they tried to do these things. Maybe some ideas did, but it took a lot of time. Right? And after World War II, the U.S. felt invincible. We got awakened by that then, and the USSR satellite launched into orbit, first with a beeping satellite, beeper that we used to track, and then they decided to send up a dog, and then they put a human in orbit, and we were still trying to get our rockets off the ground. The world changed then. The U.S. was quick to respond, which we may have to do some more of. They not only responded, they decided to upgrade the math and other courses of science in the schools. They gave teachers grants to go back in the summer in order to teach them. Things really changed, and then there was, of course, NSF was working out in foreign things, ARPA was developed, and many others, NASA and other things that help us catch up. And you know, it worked. We were the first and only one, really, to ever put people on the moon and bring them back. And that's, there was computers involved in that development, all the way from inside the capsules to down on the ground and the design of everything. And so it was, we did make a progression that was very nice for having developments of exciting new things. The groups at the various meetings that we had were very, how should I say, but much together. It wasn't just competition between us. We attended all the meetings, we visited each other, and we were always willing to help at any meeting to help the other person give his talk, show things, tie things together. It was just, you had to be inspired, and you had to believe in the future, and you had to usually be pretty young to do those two things. I hired, most of the people were 16 years old, just either in school or getting out. Some are here today. Almost all of them are retired except for me. And that was the only one. You remember Dick Tracy? Yeah, you remember that? Oh, remember Dick Tracy used to have a watch that you could speak on, see each other, and even tell time. And that watch now, which was in the comic strip, you can now go out and buy and put on your wrist today. It took a while, but that's where we stand with computers. And there was more computer power in that wristwatch than there were in the huge room occupants of computers back in the early days. That's just fascinating to think of that, how that happened. And it's always seemed to me that the Computer History Museum, particularly now, is just an excellent illustration that the creative development of ideas take time. You have to understand that it's going to take time. You have to be dedicated and inspired, but it's also going to take time. You need perseverance if you're going to do these things in all the areas. And you can learn that here. We've lost 2 years, maybe 2.5 years with the coronavirus, but we're going to have to make that up because we need everybody that we can to learn how to not just solve problems with answers in the back of the book, but how to attack problems that have never been solved using their creative ability, the synthesis rather than analysis. That's much harder to teach and takes longer to learn. And we're going to have to catch up with that because we still need a great supply, big supply of people who know how to solve those kind of problems. And like everybody else who's ever done things, I did a lot of the inventions. I did a lot of software, but I had great software people that I'd better to stay out of their way. But the thing about it was that I wanted to build this plasma panel because it had all the features that you really needed for the future. It had memory in the display. So you didn't have to go from one memory to another. You just, whenever you wrote it, it was right, stayed there until you turned it off. Sometimes if I took the terminal with me and I turned it on, first thing that popped up was the last pattern that was on the terminal before I took it down. It was very nice, and we tried it and got the idea, which took a while. Then we said, oh, here's how we should build it. And we had to build it by, we put the electrodes on the outside where everybody else was trying to put them on the inside, get things to glow. It didn't work because in order to do that, you had to have impedance between the elements. And their view of impedance was resistance, most people. And so they drill holes in the glass, and they didn't get many in before it would fall apart. But what they didn't recognize that really made it possible was that there's there's several linear impedances, and another one is capacitance. And you could have a natural capacitance if you had the glass, with the gas in between and the electrodes on the outside. And those were called AC plasma panels, which you saw in the early flat panel displays of TV, as well as in the terminals that we had built. The first time we built one was a 1-dot array. Now, that's the way people felt. They said, oh, well, you got 1 dot, but wait till you try 2. So we had this 1-dot display, and the first one we built, I got an idea while we were waiting for the two of us were waiting for our wives to arrive to pick us up after work, and they were both late. So we went to the blackboard to use our time, and we figured out how to do it, we thought. So we built one right off. And we had a vacuum system that they gave us. Wasn't in good shape. We pumped down, backfilled it with neon gas, and turned it on, tried it, and by George, the whole thing worked perfectly. Had 20 volts memory margin. It was great. And it was kind of bluish in glow, and we realized we had a leak in the vacuum system, nitrogen leaking in from the air. So we said, well, that's really something. We're going to pump down again and refill it with nitrogen and make sure there's no leak, and then watch what happened to the margin. We did that, and guess what? It didn't work at all. Now, it was a luck that we got it, that we just happened to have that leak the first time that made it work. But we soon realized that we knew what the problem was. In order to drive these things, you needed a real sharp rise time, because you had to call the initiation quickly, half a millisecond or half a microsecond or less. Then you wanted to stay the voltage like that so you could transfer the ions and electrons to the glass surface inside. And sine waves, which we drove the first one with, it did happen to work with this mixture. The problem with that is that the rise time and the period that you stay up are related to each other, and you can't have them both at the same time with that. So we went to the other kind of driver, and then we tested all the gases, including those that would give us ultraviolet for phosphorus, and that worked again, and that's when we really took off and knew how to make them in the laboratory. The result of that was that we were really able to make things work. Now, you have to be very careful, as we had a psychologist in the laboratory who was very interested in testing, as they said on the screen here earlier, the impulse of the heart rate, the change of heart rate, and a few things, physiological measurements. When we had our first one, now this was before plasma panels, we had to use dual K685s, I think they were, that were used for radar control. Because the people at the radar control for airports wanted to have something they could write in on one wave from the radar scan, and then scan it out in standard TV to distribute amongst the controllers. I saw that, and I said, hey, that's just what we need. We'll write from the computer, and we'll scan it out for TV to the terminals. So we did that, and we had some of those, and the first thing they wanted to do was see how important their material was that they had written. So we got students to volunteer. We'd strap them in, and then we'd go and say, okay, we're going to start. We'd leave the room. Well, these tubes are like your cathode ray tubes of old, and those of you know that they all have high voltage accelerators for voltages to accelerate the electron beams. And the acceleration was around maybe 25, 50,000 volts, usually about 25 is the most nowadays. But it was enough that they warned you about don't get inside the set when it's on. Well, that's how these tubes worked, but we kept them in another room above to protect them, and we turned off the voltage to make sure nothing would happen. And we had another person who was supposed to, when we were ready, to turn things on. Well, he didn't want to run upstairs, but he had an intercom, and we didn't know what was going on. He turned it on and yelled in a loud voice. You know what he said? They're all set and ready to go. You can turn on the high voltage now. Heart rate doubles in one beat. we finally got that corrected by changing the way he's done it. As I said, this museum will play an important part of the future because you can go through the museum and see what happened before, how long, your persistence that you need, to get these things done. And the people will be a great service for the people who've been out so long from the COVID virus. And thank you all very much. Okay, let me stand on the X.
Well, congratulations, Don, and thank you so much for your contributions and your stories. This is, for me personally, it was 1982 when I visited his lab. I was working at Apple, and we were showing off the Macintosh behind closed doors, and that orange glow was really happening. It was quite amazing. So 40 years ago, it's fascinating. So thank you so much. Now, let's celebrate our next fellow and her amazing career. Adele Goldberg was inspired by computer scientist Alan Kay's vision of computers and the whole notion of personal experimental modeling environments for children and adults, and really the use of simulation to understand the world. And Adele has worked tirelessly over her entire career to take that from the research lab to the real world. And there's such a list here that I am going to have to read a little bit. It's fascinating, Adele's career. She got her master's degree in information science in the late 1960s when there were very few women in the field. And she has this saying that I'm going to offer up, which is that, the Vietnam War was going on then, and they were drafting all the boys. So it took a war for you to get in, is that right? Is that what you said? I don't think so. I think you had the drive to make it happen. Adele joined Alan's lab at Xerox PARC in 1973 with the goal of teaching the programming language Smalltalk to children and adults. And she succeeded Alan running the lab and expanded the research group located in California and Oregon and studied remote group collaboration. She's president of the Association of Computing Machinery. She initiated the ACM conference on object-oriented programming, systems, languages, and applications. And in 1988, she continued to promote Smalltalk, founding a company on object-oriented programming, and it was called Park Place Systems. And through her efforts, as I commented earlier, 4 out of the 5 most popular programming languages in the world today are object-oriented. So let's hear a little bit about Adele and her own words on the screen.
I went to Xerox to join Alan Kay's dream. And in walks this wonderful man with this cardboard mock-up of a carry-it-with-you computer. I remember when I got there thinking, this is too good to be true. I was impressed with the forward thinking that gave such free hand to so many people, so many smart people. Computers were not something everybody had their hands on, but we could see where it was heading eventually. Many people just thought we were crazy and that it would never happen, it could never happen. And nothing motivates a research team more than to be told you can't do it. We were aiming towards a system that was everything was an object, which meant a class would be an object too, and you could send messages to it. You started out with a prototype and you kept changing it and working it until it was what you wanted. And what we decided to do was that Dave Robson and I would write, and we would split it up into 3 books. A language book that Dave and I would do, a user interface book that no one wanted to do, so I did, a book on implementation, the experience of everybody else, so that was edited by Glenn Krasner. The book came out in 1983, that's how long it took. It took a long time. When it came out, I think it took a lot of people by surprise. And the challenge given to me was, do you think children can learn this language? The lovely part that has proven true for professional programmers as well as kids is when you start with something, an object that does something, and then you could put many objects like those together and have them interact, you really were mapping to their natural understanding of what were the actors in the application they were trying to build. You can take a very incremental approach to learning how to control a computer system.
Amazing. Thank you for that. I would also say for me personally, 41 years ago and a little bit was my first day working at Apple at the time, and I was behind a one-way screen. Larry Tesler was on the other side, and they were running Smalltalk on the machine that I was playing with, so it was a good personal experience for me. I was a little older than some of the kids, but not much. So I'm going to introduce John Massey now, who's going to speak a little bit about Adele. John worked on Unix in Bell Labs before coming to Silicon Valley in 1983, where he worked at Convergent Technologies. And then he joined MIPS, where he helped design the MIPS risk architecture. And he's also a co-founder of SPEC, benchmarking group, an ACM national lecturer, a guest editor for IEEE Micro, and an organizer of Hot Chips conferences. And later he became vice president and chief scientist at Silicon Graphics. And he's been a consultant and advisor to the venture community and startups along the way, and also is a trustee of the museum. So we can't thank John enough for that. So John, welcome.
Thanks, Daniel. Our Fellows page summarizes Adele's work, but watch her oral history to see her magic. Persuasion by enthusiasm and passion, which I'll call PEP. Dan Ingalls wrote in his paper, The Evolution of Smalltalk, Alan and Adele both radiated a passion that was strong enough to co-opt even cost-conscious executives on a journey to a place they really couldn't understand. Extend that to anyone who Adele wanted for anything, like Byte Magazine's 500,000 subscribers. Do people here remember Byte? Yeah, sometimes dead. August Bytes covered languages usually accessible to readers. In 1978, Pascal was shown as the calm triangle of ocean attracting many people. The editor mentioned Smalltalk over there in the corner. As a snow-white island rising like an ivory tower out of the surrounding shark-infested waters. Here we find the fantastic kingdom of Smalltalk, where great and magical things happen. But alas, the craggy aloofness of the kingdom of Smalltalk keeps it out of the mainstream. That did not go over well. To expand beyond the island, much pep was needed to coax many unusual efforts. Adele convinced Byte to do Smalltalk in 1981 with the balloon liftoff idea from Dan. Now, software folks may not always want to write documents, but Adele got 13 fine articles, which may have seemed science fiction next to the products actually advertised in the magazine. Meanwhile, Adele had recruited companies and universities into porting efforts they described in a 1983 book. Portability worked, but cost-effective performance was still a challenge, needing faster micros and just-in-time compilers. That year, Adele published 1,200 pages in 2 books, which, with Byte, stirred great interest in object-oriented programming and helped launch a crucial ACM conference series. Now, Bell Labs admired Park's brilliant work, but such technology was still too costly at our scale, 28,000 people. Still, some views were shared. I did a talk that started at the labs, small is beautiful. Well, that was pretty consistent. And other thoughts on programming strategies. That became an ACM national lecture for 4 years, and the original form is still online. I finally met Adele at a February '82 workshop. Late evening, 4 of us chatted in the bar, but Adele decided she must explore New Orleans French Quarter, which can get a bit rowdy. The others passed, but Pep worked on me, so we went. I thought more Bell Labs folks needed to hear her, so I got her to speak there and visited Park for a demo. Meanwhile, I'd pushed use of Bell Labs Blit terminals, so at least we had bitmap displays and mice. In February '83, we both spoke at the ACM Computer Science Conference. The first question was, Massey, we get Unix, but doesn't Adele's work seem like science fiction? They didn't believe it, right? I said, no, Unix was long developed, but Adele does leading-edge research anticipating future hardware. More GUIs are appearing. Hardware's getting cheaper fast. You will be using a mouse pretty soon. By August, I'd moved here, partly stirred by a June visit that included Adele's house in the hills above Palo Alto. I looked around and said, oh, this is pretty nice. In spring of '84, she asked me to canoe with her park friends, which indirectly led to the first date with my wife, Angela Hayes, sitting over there. Years later, we were with Adele at Tahoe, but our skiing was stopped by a 3-foot dump and an ongoing blizzard. Angela is no snowshoe fan, but Adele's pep prevailed, and off they trudged. I stayed in the coffee shop. In 2007, Adele wanted reviewers for her Agile Mind educational software. I could help, but she also wanted a Python expert. So, of course, she got Guido von Rossum. I mean, who else would you get? Those form a small sample, but one effect is clear. Almost any computing device people actually use owes something to Adele's lifelong pep. Thanks.
Thanks, John. It's always wonderful to have that level of storytelling, so we appreciate it. And here to present the award to Adele Goldberg with the 2022 Fellow Award is John Schock. John's had an amazing career as a computer scientist and executive venture capital investor, as well as serving for, I think, 20 years on the CHM board, so we can't thank John enough for that as well. We've got a nice crowd around here, don't we? It's really good. John's an alumnus of Stanford, where he earned both master's and PhD, and he joined Xerox PARC in 1971. And from 82 to 85, he was president of the Office Systems Division of Xerox, which was helping to launch products out of the work done at PARC. And in 1985, he became a partner at Asset Management Company, and then thereafter founded his own venture firm called Alloy Ventures, where he's been a very successful investor in technology and life sciences. So please welcome my friend John Schock. Great.
Thank you, Daniel. What a joyous event for distinguished honorees. You've already heard about Adele's biography and accomplishments, so I'm not going to recapitulate that. I did want to give a little bit of background, and then I was going to tell 3 war stories or anecdotes to try to illuminate some aspects of her history and her character. First, a bit of background. Adele and I go back a long ways. Daniel has blown my cover on how old I am. I'd been an undergraduate at Stanford. I'd taken a class taught by Alan Kay, an unusual character, and I used to ask him a lot of hard questions. I was a bit of a wise guy, so he offered me a job at PARC. And I had gone there. We were in very early days working on trying to explore what to do with computers in education. And after a year or two, I ran across a meeting that was taking place at Stanford on exactly this subject, held at what was then IMSSS, which is where Adele was working. And I got to meet her. And we had some things in common, both an interest in computers and education and the fact that we'd both been raised in or around Chicago. And I wish I could recall the exact details, but I basically said to Alan, you need to meet Adele. I said to Adele, you need to meet Alan, and the rest is history. And like any good matchmaker or yenta, I only take credit for the successes. So at this point, I had planned to tell 3 anecdotes, and as you'll see in a moment, I want to compress this a little bit so we don't chew up too much time. The first, and I'm happy to talk to people about these later. The first one, Adele is whip smart and articulate and not bashful. And many of you know the story about Steve Jobs wanting to come visit at Xerox and the internal battles and Adele being as tough as you can imagine in trying to argue about the relative merits of this. I fear ultimately she was right. The second story that I was going to tell is, and so that's the positive, firm, really strong Adele that we know. She also, in the second story, has a wonderful, gracious, supportive, polite side, which I witnessed in a story that we tell about each other quite frequently. I think this was in 1981 at the National Computer Conference in Chicago. I think we had just launched the Xerox Star Workstation. We had the Ethernet. It's a big show in McCormick Place. And Adele and I are walking around working the floor, and we're stumble upon, I think it was Burroughs, and this guy is pitching us on his new innovative approach to getting denser storage. And Adele, and we had an interaction, and to this day, Adele reminds me, John, you were so rude. And I always think of Adele, my God, Adele, you were so polite. And she was polite and gracious, and I was my usual self, because the improvement in storage density that was being flogged, so we're here, we got Ethernets and workstations and so on, was a punch card that instead of having 80 columns had 96 columns on it. And Adele was incredibly gracious under those circumstances and doesn't let me forget this story. And the final observation, that you've heard the breadth of Adele's career, and there's a longer meditation about invention and innovation and technology transfer, and Adele crossed through all of those. And I'm reminded, some of you may know Professor Mac Beasley from Stanford, who taught me when we were recruiting people out of his lab that technology transfer is a body contact sport. And Adele practiced that when she went off to create a company, sort of a challenging situation, but really believed in the importance of taking these ideas, moving them out into the world, and you had to have a commercial thrust and some scale in order to accomplish that. Now, instead of saying any more about those, I just want to say, as we all like to comment, but wait, there's one more thing. And as you know, Alan Kay was not able to join us tonight. He did, however, just recently send me a note, which he has asked me to read to all of the honorees. It's wonderful to see two of my longest-time colleagues and friends inducted into the Computer History Museum Hall of Fellows. And with Don Bitzer and Len Kleinrock, what a great foursome for this year. Both Dan and Adele operated in the finest traditions that PARC brought from ARPA IPTO, to fully embrace the large visions for future interactive personal computing and networking, and to be able to independently and collaboratively create new important ideas and artifacts to further those visions. They were and are inspiring leaders for all of us, not just as researchers, but as great human beings. I love them both and loved working and playing with them. Best wishes, Alan Kay. So with that, yes, thank you. Adele Goldberg, on behalf of the Computer History Museum, it's my distinct honor to present you the 2022 Fellow Award for the promotion and co-development of the Smalltalk programming environment and for advancing the use of computers in education. Thank you, everyone. You want to put this down, or you want to hold it?
Whew. I'm tired about just thinking about all the things I used to do. Which is why I moved to Montana. It's quieter. Thank you so much for this honor. And I want to do a special call out to the museum staff who I had the privilege of working with last month on the 50th anniversary, 50 years of the first Smalltalk release. It was really fun. Alan Kay once told me that when you get an award, you accept it because you're representing all the people you really think should be on this stage. And no, I don't believe on ghosts, but I want to give a special bow of thanks to the Xerox PARC Learning Research Group. Some of you are here today, some of you, everyone was there last month, whose work on the Dynabook project has been well documented and on display here at the museum. They were and are a group of amazing inventors who, thank goodness, no one told that the grand vision was hard. We worked really hard to get Xerox's attention. We had a great employer who gave us a lot of money and time to try and invent something that could be a new product for the company, and we failed. And that was to get their attention. And that was a good lesson. The two things we tried to do, not often talked about, was that Larry Tesler helped me with this. We went back east to the heartland of Xerox, to the copier duplicator people, and discovered something really interesting. First, that the company was making its money on toner, and if the copier duplicators didn't run, no toner was being used. And there was a serious tech support problem because the documentation for the machines was huge. in the trunk of the car of the tech serviceman who came to fix the machines. And he was typically too embarrassed to leave the office and go out to the car to look things up in the back of his trunk. So we said, we have this machine that Doug Fairburn helped us build. Doug is here, thank you. And it's on display in the museum, the note taker. And we think that we can load onto that machine, not every 6 months the way you print things, but every night if you want, download upgrades, and they could take it into the office and look things up and wouldn't have to be embarrassed, and then you would have a whole change in the whole tone of tech support. So they turned us down. In 1981, we had the privilege, the team, of giving a first presentation of Smalltalk 80 at the 1981 National Computer Conference, where the Star Workstation was announced and the grid computer was announced, and I guess 96 column cards were announced. But unfortunately, the world wasn't ready for sophisticated office workstations, neither from us, not from Xerox, and not from Apple. And one of the Xerox executives went to two teams to say, what would you do to fix this problem? And they went to one team that said, well, it's price elastic, and therefore the problem is the speed of the machine, and they designed a new machine. And Dan Ingalls and I said, nobody knows how to drive a mouse. And the buy-in is big. You had to have a file server and a printer and a network on that one machine, if that's all you wanted. So we said, the Dallas Development Center, who we've been working with, had a 68,000 base Smalltalk 80 machine. We had a very simple editor. We had a very simple unstructured graphics. And maybe we can have a kindergarten introduction while you still pitch the PhD. I didn't quite say it that way or they would have thrown me out, but Dan and I designed a machine we called the Twinkle, a little star. It would have been out in 1983, and no one ever gave us any feedback. Our timing was terrible because the people who should have heard about that had already announced their departure from Xerox. So 2 big disappointments. However, there were Smalltalk publications that came out of our project that generated a lot of interest, including quite a bit of pressure from at least one government agency with 3 letters. It was they really needed, as they told us, support from the growing community interested in Smalltalk. And that was the incentive to start Park Place Systems, with a very tight rule, which is that agency was only allowed to take 10% of our time. Park Place System was a forum for a very different kind of education. Because we were among the first commercial wave of companies marketing object-oriented technology to the corporate world, we created curriculum that we shared with independent consultants. We participated in figuring out analysis and design methodologies and tools needed to replace those from the structured programming community. I'll spare you the words that community used to say to me, how we were destroying their business. Yay. This work benefited from years of working with children and literally designing the Smalltalk 80 programming environment with both teachability and usability in mind. I also had a very interesting education experience because I became the personal media tutor for magazines like Business Week. Many other companies, hardware companies, I think it was called Next, used to give interviews to these magazines, and they would call me up and say, is this correct? And clearly it was a little correct, but not entirely correct. And I was very worried the impact on my customers, so I spent hours teaching them. So it was interesting to see how it's like a telephone game where you say one thing and it comes back different. And I spent a lot of time personally tutoring them. But in turn, what we learned about the business and government worlds of modeling added to our understanding of what is still needed if we are to create a compelling modeling environment in which a student can learn by creating and sharing simulations that represent his or her understanding about how the physical and social worlds work. That was the goal of the Dynabook. To do so is still the unfinished educational mission of the Dynabook project. With me today are my family, my daughters Rebecca and Rachel, who were born into a world of creativity and teamwork and business talk. Rebecca is currently the director of the Universal Human Rights Initiative, and Rachel is a PhD physicist who's just started her own company. My two sisters are here. Michelle is the instigator of much of our adventure travel, and Gloria is my best ever yoga teacher. Thanks, family, for being here and for your continuing support. As I know well, life is not a plan you make and execute, but rather it is a sequence of opportunities offered up by the people you meet, often by chance. Choosing to follow any one opportunity is hopefully owed to a spark of interest, lit early, that perseveres. My spark was lit in 1967 when I worked as an undergraduate for Carl Zinn at the University of Michigan Center for Research on Learning and Teaching, programming a German course on an IBM 1500 in Course Writer 2. That was my second language. As a Michigan student, I learned first to program in the Michigan Algorithm Decoder, MAD. What a perfect name. Although we were doing numerical analysis programs. Previously, in 1966, I learned to wire boards for IBM accounting machines by reading IBM programmed instruction books. I was so excited to see those machines here in the museum today and see those boards that I used to say, oh, that little address has a number in it and it's going over here, and you trace all the wires. What a great way to program. Now you can't see anything. In 1970, I passed an obligatory second language exam from my University of Chicago PhD by taking a computer-based Russian course running under the Stanford Learning Management System. The head of the Slavic department wrote the course, he administered the exam, and he went, "How did you pass?" And I said, "Well, you wrote the course." And he just looked at me like, well, I didn't know it actually worked, right? It's that look on his face. These days, I'm learning Spanish by taking online courses, and I follow YouTube tutorials on photography, software, and art. So I am a believer in the idea that technology can enhance our ability to learn. But I'm self-motivated to learn. I continue to wonder what it is about technology that can motivate those who have not yet felt their spark for learning. It is also clear to me that I did not find my career. My career found me. I would like to tell you some of the people, the ghosts standing around me, who found me and set me on my career path. I'll start with Professor Patrick Suppies, who was introduced to me by a University of Chicago professor, Roman Weil. He encouraged Pat to invite me to Stanford University to work on his NSF-funded computer-aided instruction project. When I did my oral exams to be allowed to do my PhD, I was asked, what did you want to work on? And I said, well, I want to see what's the next thing in education. And I was told, oh no, it's all figured out already. 1969. My task at Stanford was to solve the dialogue problem that Pat proposed, to create an intelligent tutor for students learning to construct proofs online, a tutor that operated without pre-stored help. I taught myself Lisp, and I built a new course on symbolic logic used by Stanford philosophy department students. Embedded in this course were mechanical theorem provers that informed what was most likely one of the first intelligent tutors embedded in a CAI course. So I came out of an AI tradition. While I was at Stanford, I attended Bay Area ACM user groups on the use of computers in education. I met John Schock, as he just finished telling you, and he introduced me to Alan Kay. My life was forever undid when Alan Kay invited me to join the pursuit of the Dynabook dream. I'm pretty sure that invitation was initiated, as John has already pointed out, by John, and I forever thank you for that. You've changed my life. It was 1973 when I joined Xerox, pregnant with Rebecca, and I've been recently told that pregnant women don't get hired anymore. I don't know what's going on in this world. Allen's was a small group of people who understood that computers could really impact education only if your computer was always with you, like pencil and paper or art supplies, and were personally owned and programmable. My task was not to determine whether learning to program makes kids better problem solvers, but whether it was possible to teach kids how to program using Smalltalk, that is, a purely object-oriented approach. The early answers were actually mixed. We had lots of inventing to do, many years of new Smalltalks to create a system in which the kids could learn to write programs by finding and reading interesting existing programs, learning through exploring existing object implementations, and using those objects to create their own tools and applications. In parallel to my transition to Xerox PARC, I poked my head into the world of computer science professional societies. David Brandon, then chairman of the ACM Special Interests Group Governing Board, noticed me listening in on a board meeting. I was very hard to miss since I was the only woman in the room. He invited me later to join the board, and when I said to him, "Hey, are you doing this because I'm a woman?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Okay, you're an honest man, so I'll say yes too." This, of course, introduced me to the broader computer science community, which taught me what I needed to know to become the editor-in-chief of the ACM Journal of Computing Surveys. David convinced me to run for national secretary when he ran for president, so we could start the process of turning around ACM's financial situation. I continued the task when I was elected the next president. When Alan left Xerox in 1978, as was noted earlier, I found myself the managers of Alan's expanded dream team, reporting to Bert Sutherland. Bert was the real hero of our Smalltalk impact story. He cleared the way for us to run that project to create a standard specification for the virtual machine of the next Smalltalk, which we called Smalltalk 80. And he introduced us to the companies who ended up working with us. We had very specific criteria. It had to be a hardware company with an internal software team who could help the hardware guys understand what it meant to support a purely object-oriented world. We did not know at the time whether we needed special hardware. That group from Apple, DEC, Hewlett-Packard, and Tektronix tested the implementation of Smalltalk 80 on their hardware products. Several universities joined the effort, notably UMass and the UC Berkeley group, then investigated running Smalltalk 80 on a RISC machine. By setting a standard at the virtual machine level, we created a shareable programming environment and supported fully portable application delivery. So Pat, John, David, Alan Kay, and Bert Sutherland, they enabled my career path, to which I will add 3 more: Whit Haney, Richard Hayes, or Dick Hayes, and I'm going to be so nervous here, and Bill. I was clearly handed jobs which I had little or no training, but for which I took the risk knowing that I would have a lot of guidance from people willing to answer my questions and give advice, even when I did not know which questions to ask. I definitely learned early that if I asked for help, there were lots of people who would step up. Frankly, I thought that if, as a woman, I asked a man for help, they were compelled to go on and on and on and teach me everything they knew, and that's what happened. I kind of wished I knew some of it before I started the business, but there you are. And now back to Alan Kay. One thing he taught me is that if you feel something you want to do is truly important, it is worth the risk, not to ask for permission. We did a lot of things in our group, including lining up venture funding for Parkway Systems ahead of completing a technology transfer deal with Xerox. It was very important to our strategy because we were going to introduce the new technology to the corporate world, and we needed a credibility of our employer, our former employer. It was Whit Haney, at the time the head of the Xerox Lisp business, whose friendship and advice encouraged me to pursue the Smalltalk business opportunity. Despite the fact that he and I agreed the odds of a woman raising venture capital in 1987, 1988 was not very good. But we did do it. I suspect it was Richard Hayes, senior partner at Xerox Ventures, who sealed the deal for us. I know that when we did put the check in the bank and we had champagne at our offices, Peter Deutsch, who said, "You're not going to be able to do it," got a bottle of champagne on his head. Not the glass, the water. It was also certainly Bill Elmore, who invested in our second financing round, that kept me on the path to profitability. So those are my special people who gave me opportunities that was done with a great deal of trust. One more story, which is the inventor, Bertram Meyer, who invented a language called Eiffel and was a kind of competitor at the same time that we were rolling out, was a little discouraged. And he told me he hired a consultant to find out why was I successful with Park Place and he wasn't. And this consultant, Bertram was a friend, and he told me this story. He said, the consultant said, it's because Adele is always out marketing. And it's funny, because when I first started the business, I didn't have a clue what marketing people did, except be enthusiastic and excited about what they were trying to accomplish. So thank you very much for this honor. It's been it's been very overwhelming, as you can tell. Thank you.
Congratulations, Adele, and thank you for that inspiring talk. Now I'm delighted to introduce flutist Ryo Furuta. Named as a cultural ambassador to the United States at age 25, he has performed with Yo-Yo Ma's Silk Road Ensemble, the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center, and the United Nations. Ryo is a professor of flute at San Jose State University and also professor of performance practice and community engagement at Santa Clara University. He has an ongoing presence in local juvenile detention centers and collaborative projects with homeless women of color to address injustice. Here tonight, thanks to the sponsorship of SV Creates, Ryo will perform a piece by contemporary composer Allison Loggins Hull. Please welcome Ryo Furuta. Thank you, Ryo. That was beautiful. To continue honoring these amazing pioneers of tech this evening, we now turn to Dan Ingalls. Dan was inspired by Alan Kay's vision of computers as personal, dynamic medium in which the line between user and programmer was blurred. In this vision, the user could modify how their computer worked in real time. Changes happened live. Like many of our fellows, his curiosity began at a young age, and he collected trash from his neighbors to create inventions like a carbon arc that he used to melt and blow things up. Dan Ingalls has devoted much of his life to developing the Smalltalk object-oriented programming language. He joined PARC in 1971. The following year, and a bet between Ingalls and Kay spurred Kay to design an extensible programming language that could be described in a single page, which Ingalls promptly implemented. This was Smalltalk 72, an interpretive language based solely on objects that communicate by sending messages. Since then, he has been the principal architect of 5 generations of Smalltalk environments. He designed the byte-coded virtual machine that powers Smalltalk 80 and most Smalltalks of today. As part of his work on the Smalltalk user interface at PARC, Ingalls also developed BitBLT, a graphics primitive that was widely adopted in graphical user interface designs throughout the industry. And now, let's hear from Dan in his own words.
I had an office next to George's, and it turned out to be across the hall from Alan Kay's office. And I realized after just a few days that I was often more interested in the conversations that I could hear Alan having than I was in the work I was doing. One of the things that Alan was talking about was doing a small personal computing system. And that really excited me. We wanted to be able to build a language that could easily model different things in the world, you know, so the notion of classes of objects, and if you were going to do something that was a graphical system, you'd want to be able to model things like points and rectangles. Just the feel of real personal computing. I mean, it didn't exist before, really. You know, you had time-sharing systems where you could have your own individual thing going, but the vision here was to have real graphics and dynamic graphics, and a language that you could see and change. And somehow from the very beginning, we all thought in terms of everything being live, but there are a lot of people in the industry who just don't get what a difference it makes to have things be completely live. It's so valuable. If you're writing some software for a client and they can look at it and they can say, oh, can you change this? And you change it then and there, you're moving forward faster. Philosophically, I've always wanted to give away everything I did. I mean, I also want to make money, but no, I was glad to see things go that way. And, you know, I wound up going to Apple just hopefully to get Smalltalk to go out more widely. That grew into the whole field of object-oriented programming, where you see it now. I mean, there's C# at Microsoft and Objective-C at Apple, and those all grew. There's a direct lineage of Objective-C from Smalltalk.
I remember the first time I got to play with that interface, too. It's a lot of fun. Here to shed more light on Dan's accomplishments and impact is Gilad Baraka. Gilad is the creator of the Newspeak programming language and a researcher of object-oriented programming languages. He is currently a technical fellow at F5 and has held positions at Google, SAP Labs, Cadence, and Sun. He was awarded the Senior Dahl Nygaard Prize in 2017 and has authored and co-authored several books, including the Java Language Virtual Machine Specifications and the Dart Programming Language. Please welcome Gilad Baraka.
I can't tell you how thrilled I am to have the privilege of speaking about Dan's work here. I first learned Smalltalk in 1984, and it took me about 5 years till I could actually get my hands on working Smalltalk system, even though it had been love at first sight in 1984. But it's taken me decades to fully appreciate what a masterpiece of design that was and is. In the fall of 1991, I was finishing up my PhD, and I was looking for a job. It was a bad time, it was a recession and so forth. And I went to UPSLA, the conference that Adele helped start. And on the bulletin board, you might remember bulletin boards, there was an opening. And this was a Wall Street firm, and they eventually hired me to build a type checker for Smalltalk. Now, if you know about these things, if you know Smalltalk and you know about type checkers, you might ask, why was this necessary? And the answer is it wasn't, but it was interesting. So that project in New York City morphed into a startup in California whose task it was to build a high-performance Smalltalk engine and a complete system, a live system, as you just heard. And we did that. We leaned heavily on technology that had been developed for Self, which was another language that was a descendant of Smalltalk. And eventually, we got acquired by Sun Microsystems, and that technology became the basis for the Hotspot Java virtual machine. Now, on a personal level, this whole project brought me to California and actually enabled me to live here in Silicon Valley. And launched my whole industrial career. Professionally, once we got to Sun, we found out that we were almost the only people who really understood object-oriented programming because of that Smalltalk background, right? As Alan Kay has said, point of view is worth 80 IQ points, and if you're like me, you need every one of those. And it really gave us an edge because we understood this stuff. We understood why interfaces mattered. We understood what reflection was at a time when very few people understood that. And so we owe all of that to Dan's work. And more importantly, on an industrial level, right, that project essentially made Java viable. And that became the backbone of commercial enterprise development for decades thereafter, and to a considerable degree even now. And it also eventually made V8 possible. Lars Bach, who worked with me on that Strongtalk project, the original project, and then on the Hotspot VM, eventually did V8, and that's what made JavaScript viable. And that's, you know, if you use a web page, all the interesting things that happen, they're very large due to that. Which is not to blame Dan for all the terrible things that are wrong with all that stuff. Now, beyond the engines, the languages, as Daniel mentioned, most of the world's programmers are using things that are at least termed object-oriented languages, and they certainly were influenced by Smalltalk, though not nearly enough. And in any case, even if you don't program, you use the stuff that Dan invented and co-invented every day, the overlapping windows, the scroll bars, the pop-up menus, all that stuff. We'd literally be on the trees without him. So lastly, I want to say that all that contribution, all that impact isn't over yet. Because that vision of humanistic computing, that people can control their environment and program it and make it do what they want, is even more essential today, because the computing environment becomes more and more pervasive. It's all around us, and it's influencing more and more people's lives in a deeper way. And the need for humans to have agency and control over that environment is greater than ever. And that vision is a key part of that, because people always want their environment to work for them, their computing environment to work for them, and they also want their environment to be pleasant and, if possible, even beautiful. And there are very, very few people who can do both of those things, and Dan is one of them. So thank you, Dan.
Thanks so much, Gilad. That was a fun and meaningful tribute to Dan. Here to present Dan Ingalls with the 2022 Fellow Award is Ted Kaler. Currently a scientist at Viewpoints Research Institute, Ted met Dan Ingalls in 1972 and has worked for Dan and Alan Kay on every version of Smalltalk and Squeak. Ted was on the 4-person team that built Smalltalk 76 in just 9 months. Later, working at Apple, he advised and worked with Bill Atkinson during the creation of HyperCard. And he wrote the storage manager and garbage collector for Squeak Smalltalk on the Mac. Moving with Alan and Dan to Disney, Ted worked on eToys, a tile programming system for kids. Please welcome to the stage Ted Kaler.
Hi, everybody. So in 1972, George White was an early Xerox PARC employee. I think he was employee number 3. And I happened to know him, and he hired me to be a programmer. And he said, I have one other programmer, and you're really going to like him. And that was Dan Ingalls. And so Dan became my best friend, and I've worked with him for 50 years since then. Okay, so Alan, as has been mentioned already, Alan Kay's project was across the hall from George White's project. And so Dan and I heard him talk about personal computing, about bitmap displays, about wanting a new language in which everything was sent by messages to objects. We talked with Alan about Lisp and APL and things like that. In the fall of 1972, Dan went to work for Alan, and I left to go to grad school. Alan has said that the kernel of a programming language or an operating system is a mathematical object. And these kernels are the mathematics of our time. The best of them combine the power along many dimensions and have the simplicity and beauty. As you might expect I'm going to say, Dan is an extraordinary composer of these kernels. He wove together the powerful ideas of objects whose internals are protected, message passing, classes of objects, subclasses and superclasses, the same message having a similar meaning in different classes, and real-time message lookup. Starting with the Smalltalk interpreter, Dan Ingalls is responsible for a land rush. And that land rush is optimization for interpreters, especially bytecode interpreters. And the motto of people who do this is cheat but don't get caught. And so this has been going on for a long time. And so there's many things people do, various kinds of caching and lookups and predicting what the programming language is going to do. And as Gilad has mentioned, these tricks are in Hotspot and V8 and many, many other interpreted language systems. And they all started with Dan being the first person to try to do this with Smalltalk. So Dan chose wisely from the waterfall of ideas that Alan Kay brought to his attention. His genius was to pick a set of goals that are both ambitious and can actually be accomplished in a reasonable amount of time. I was so privileged to be on the team that built Smalltalk 76 and also later on the team that built Squeak Smalltalk in 9 months. Dan is an extraordinary leader, gentle and open to contributions from everyone. He brings out the best in his teammates.
Thank you, Ted. And thank you, Gilad, especially. And thank you, members of the Computer History Museum. I'm grateful to those who nominated me and considered me worthy of induction here. I'm deeply honored to be inducted as a fellow. I was asked to choose one word, and my word is unanticipated. It was pure luck that brought me to Xerox PARC in 1971, and I immediately breathed inspiration from personalities such as Butler Lampson, Chuck Thacker, and Alan Kay. From Butler, I learned that genius thinks very fast. From Chuck, I learned that genius is unstoppable. And from Alan, I learned that genius can see the future and can still trust others to make it happen. Those 3 men, with some help, also conspired to channel PARC's Office of the Future mission to the development of the Alto, a high-performance personal computer with a beautiful 600 by 800 pixel black and white display. And to cap it off, Alan came up with a one-page outline for an extensible language based simply on objects sending messages. I worked to make Alan's sketch into a real system that children could use and that we could all learn from. Because it was all built on messages, nothing had to be relinked or recompiled when you made a change. So with arguably the slowest language in the industry, we could still get a turnaround time for changes of like 3 or 4 seconds. So from 1972 to 1976, we evolved an integrated development environment that put many commercial systems to shame. And so came a shift in our priorities from a focus on education to delivering a commercial product, the Smalltalk 80 development environment. Part of what set Smalltalk 80 apart at the time was its integration of bitmap graphics with the user interface. I wanted to unify all the details of line drawing, scrolling, text display, animation, menus on a bitmap display. I finally figured out how to put all the ugly code, you know, there's like word boundaries and masking and shifting in one place, and I called that kernel BitBlit. I was into tongue twisters. The Alto, with its microcode design, enabled such tiny kernels to run 5 times faster than normal code, a wonderful enticement for the small is beautiful enthusiast. I got BitBlit to run as fast as if it were hardware, and it became the core of many graphics libraries. Now a word about Xerox. The scientific method is key to research. You know, based on observation, you come up with a theory about how things work. You make a prediction, and then you test it to see if your theory was right. The same kind of thing works in software development. You see what's bulky or slow. You design a new language or system, and then you build that system to see if it actually turns out to be smaller, faster, better. It is much to the credit of Xerox's management that they stood by us through the innovation of 5 different generations of Smalltalk until it was a commercially acceptable language and until its graphics and code library was an informal standard in the industry. I had always wanted Smalltalk to be available for personal computing enthusiasts. So at this point, I moved to Apple, and I've made an open source version of Smalltalk 80 available on the Macintosh and the Lisa. Unanticipated was the call I got to leave the industry and take over my family's resort business in Virginia. Fortunately, after 8 years, we found another owner for that business, and I returned to California to find Alan ready for another run at a learning environment for children of all ages. In the meantime, computers had become 10 times faster with 10 times more memory, and I saw that it would be possible to build a new Smalltalk entirely in Smalltalk itself. This enabled color and sound and scaling and rotation faster than and simpler than we had ever done before. That became Squeak, the media Smalltalk, and it became the vehicle for eToys, the forerunner of Scratch, and it subsequently led to the lively kernel that I did in JavaScript. I have truly enjoyed these adventures with Smalltalk, and even in JavaScript with the lively kernel. The technology has been fun, of course, but I'm most grateful for having shared each chapter of the saga with wonderful small teams at Xerox, Apple, Disney, Sun, and SAP YCR. I could never have anticipated such love and support as I have received from a few very special people. Don Knuth, Vishal Sika at VianI, C.H. Huang and Chris Thorgrimson at Lam Research, my dear wife, Kat, and my collaborator and continuing inspiration, Alan Kay. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. That's terrific. It's a real pleasure to hear your thoughts on that. It's a It's everyday life now. Congratulations. Now we're going to turn to our final award honoree this evening, Leonard Kleinrock. When Leonard was 6 years old, he was growing up in Manhattan. He built a crystal radio out of some parts that he found. And he says, and I think we'll all agree, that that was the day he was an engineer. It's pretty exciting. Leonard went on to pioneer the mathematical theory of computer networks and uncovered and delivered the fundamental principles that apply to the design of packet switching and packet switch networks like the internet is today. He's the head of the Network Measurement Center at ARPANET in the late 1960s, and he was a mentor to a generation of networking pioneers. And in 1980s, he was very influential and was a key voice in expanding the use of the internet and the always-on world within which we all live today. And then there is this moment in time on October 29th, 1969, where the first connection was made between host computers on ARPANET, which of course was the precursor to the internet that we live with today. The connection was made from Len's lab at UCLA to SRI International, which was then part of Stanford. And from those two nodes, and then Santa Barbara in Utah, we have the internet and the wired planet that we live with today. So thank you so much for what you did then and what you've delivered to the world. As a faculty member throughout his career at UCLA, Len has trained generations of students across the world on networking and infrastructure in this area. Those students and their students have been instrumental in designing the way networks of all kinds function, and now we have billions of people around the world connected. So let's hear a little bit about Len, from Len, please.
I came out in August of '63 with my, I had 2 children by this time, drove across the country, started working at UCLA, started teaching information theory and some minimal networking theory, but it wasn't all the vogue at the time. Nobody in the industry was interested in data networks. And in particular, the largest network company in the world, AT&T, they said, no, it's never going to work. And even if it does work, we want nothing to do with it. But I enjoy teaching. You work with brilliant students, undergraduate and graduate. That keeps you young, and so that's the reason I stayed. Dwight Eisenhower decided to create this Advanced Research Projects Agency, which was going to bring back the prime position the United States had in science and technology. And sure enough, the economics and the technology supported the introduction of a real network. It was decided that UCLA would be the first node because me and my group had the expertise to do the Network Measurement Center, stress the network, test it, measure it, and to think about what the fundamentals were. The second node was to be SRI, third node, University of California, Santa Barbara, the fourth node in December of '69 would be University of Utah. How do networks get created? Well, there's sort of 3 phases. There are the embryonic networks, which the ARPANET was to begin with. It was just sort of being designed and fiddled with and changed. And then there's a prototype network, which you deploy to a user group where they understand there will be failures, but it'll be up most of the time. And then when it's proven, it becomes a production network, which the internet is today. My mother died 2 months shy of 100. 2 months shy of 100. And she was using the internet. And that gave me great pleasure. While she was alive, I make sure to make the point that everyone uses the internet.
This is amazing. That was not that long ago. So here to share more about Professor Kleinrock is Nick McEwen. He's a good friend of mine. Nick is now a Senior Vice President and General Manager of Network and Edge Group at Intel, working for Pat Gelsinger to do the nation's work. I really appreciate that, Nick. But he's, I'd say, best known for his professorship at Stanford, where he has been since 1995. And along the way, founded 5 network companies, including Barefoot Networks. He's received dozens of industry awards, including the 2021 IEEE Alexander Graham Bell Medal. Nick is a member of the U.S. National Academy of Engineering and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and a fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering. Please welcome and joining my friend Nick McEwen.
Wow, this is such an honor to, I get to talk about one of my heroes. So many of us remember many life-changing moments, right? The moment we saw Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon, 9/11, Gangnam Style. So a life-changing moment for me happened in 1989. I started as a PhD student at Berkeley, and my PhD advisor, Jean Morin, handed me a book. That book was Len Kleinrock's Queuing Systems, Volume 1, Theory. The book was about queuing theory, Markov chains, Markov processes. And up until that moment, I'd been studying and learning about how the internet worked. But what that book taught me, Len, was why it worked. It taught me about that intuition and that theory, and taught me that all future networks would be built on packet switching and message switching, as you had said. It was a huge revelation to me, and I devoured that book. I must have read it 10 times from cover to cover. I spent the next 10 years studying and using those ideas in my research at Berkeley and then Stanford, and then trying to put them into practice. But I've got to confess, that last chapter, under the GG1Q, I never really kind of understood that. Lindley equations and Kingman algebra, I never quite got that, but we won't tell anyone about that. So Len distilled into those pages the ideas and the intuition that inspired me and countless students of packet switching, queuing theory, and the internet for years to come. So a few years later, I heard Len give a talk about the power of a network. This simple and intuitive metric of any packet switched network is defined to be the average throughput, how much stuff you can push through it, divided by the delay or the latency of the packets that flow through. Clearly, more throughput is good, more delay is bad, and so the ratio of the two, throughput over delay, is the power. And it would seem obvious that you can just make the power bigger by making the throughput larger, right? Well, it turns out, and we know this from driving on the road, that if you put more stuff in, the queues get longer and things get slower. So there's an optimization point. And this is congestion. And it brought the internet to its knees on many occasions. So Len made an enduring observation, a simple principle, if you like, that guides how congestion is controlled in the internet to this day. And that is, keep the pipes full, just full, but no fuller. In other words, fill the pipes, but not the queues. If you can hold it at that point, you can maximize the network power. This beautifully simple, inspiring principle has inspired many researchers and those who design congestion control algorithms to this day. But for me, the most memorable and inspiring moment with Len was when I visited him at UCLA about 10 years ago. There he was sitting at his desk with a pencil and a clean sheet of paper, with that kind of slightly cheeky twinkle in his eye, creating something new before he went off to do karate. Next door was that node that we just saw, the interface message processor, or IMP, where he and his students sent that first message in 1969. I asked him if we could power it on to see if it still works. He thought the dust might catch on fire. So I took a picture of Len standing next to that first node. And that night I showed it to my family and I said, this is a guy I met today who helped start the internet. And now, if there isn't someone who helped change the world, then I don't know who that is, but Len Kleinrock. So Len, congratulations on this award. You've always been my hero, and thank you for inspiring me and every student, researcher, and engineer of the internet for over 50 years.
Well done, well done. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nick. And here to present Leonard Kleinrock with the 2022 Fellow Award is Jim Carosa. Jim is a distinguished university professor of computer science and associate chancellor at UMass Amherst. He's a visiting researcher at IBM Research, Technicolor Research, INRIA, and the Sorbonne. I'm not very good with languages, Sorbonne University. From 2015 to 2019, Jim served as the assistant director at the National Science Foundation, where he led the Directorate of Computer and Information Science and Engineering. And in 2018, he served as an assistant director in the White House Office of Science, Technology, and Policy, where we need good people, for sure. He's received numerous awards, including the IEEE Infocom Award and the ACM SIGGRAPH Lifetime Achievement Award. CCOM, excuse me. Please welcome Jim Carosa.
Well, thank you very much. And I, like Nick, I'm incredibly honored to be here to help honor one of my heroes as well. An item actually that Daniel left out of my bio, and thank you for the introduction, is that Len is my academic grandfather. One of Len's PhD students, Yekiam Yamini, was my PhD advisor when I was a grad student at Columbia. And I've never been able to sort of sit on Len's knee and sort of bounce up and down and look up at him adoringly. I'll say actually that I met Anne, Len's real granddaughter here, who I imagine had that great pleasure of bouncing and looking up at him adoringly. But, you know, that's what grandkids do with their grandparents. But I, like countless others, have looked up to Len and have admired him for my entire career. So Len, I'm also hoping maybe I can get a photo of me sitting on your knee when we're out there, okay? We heard about Len's many pioneering, truly groundbreaking scientific achievements in the video. In Nick McEwen's remarks, Nick, if you've only read Len's first volume of Queuing Systems 10 times, I've read it 20 times. That's how important that work is. The impact of Len's work on the field of networking and networking's impact on society has been phenomenal. But there's also been a personal impact that Len has had on so many people. People like those who've worked directly with Len, like more than his 50 PhD students. I think there are at least 5 or 6 of them here tonight. I know a number of them very well, and they've all talked uniformly about how he's impacted and changed and profoundly changed their lives and shaped their lives by working with him. And all of them, many of them, have gone on to do really amazing things. They're the people that have worked with Len in many of the companies that he's founded, or in technical service organizations or societies where he's had leadership roles. People like me, like Nick, who've been inspired by Len's research and hold his work and his legacy really in awe. Len's been a role model and an inspiration for me and for countless others throughout our careers. And then there are those people, other people, countless others, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, who've been students in Len's classes, or who've learned, been inspired about networking through Len's writings, his research papers, his books, and all his terrific writing. So we're here today to honor Len for his pioneering research achievements and his role in the ARPANET and expanding the internet. But let's also remember that these amazing achievements are amplified even further by the countless people whose lives he's touched and whose careers, like mine, he's really inspired. And it's really been amply evident to me listening to all the speakers here tonight about inspiring role models and how important mentoring is for people to look up to admire, to learn from, and that these are tremendous engines for pushing forward people and pushing a field forward. So I, like many others, are particularly indebted to Len. Oh, you're over there now. Particularly indebted to Len for all of that. And so I want to say from myself, from Nick, and from the hundreds of thousands of other people whose lives you've impacted, to say thank you. So now it's time for the presentation of the Fellow Award, which we have here. and I'll read it. Leonard Kleinrock, on behalf of the Computer History Museum, it's my distinct honor and pleasure to present you with the 2022 Fellow Award for your pioneering work on the mathematical theory of computer networks and roles in the ARPANET and expanding the internet.
So Nick and Jim, I'm going to tear up in a minute. This has been overwhelming. I want to thank you, and I want to thank my colleagues, my students, my family, and all of you for coming here. This has been an amazing, amazing evening with all of my co-inductees. Congratulations to all of you to join the ranks of the Computer History Museum Fellows. Thank you very much. Today's younger generation can't imagine a time when the internet did not exist, but there was a beginning. And it was initiated by the appearance in late 1969 of the ARPANET, the first large-scale, heterogeneous, multi-purpose computer network. And exactly 2 weeks from today will be the 53rd anniversary of that event. So we celebrate at that point. Now, the creation of the internet was clearly a joint effort. We've heard about all the other inductees and past Computer History Museum Fellows. It's not an individual effort, it's a joint effort. It's an effort by an army of recognized pioneers, a number of whom have already been inducted into the CHM Fellows. People like Larry Roberts, Bob Kahn, Vince Cerf, Tim Berners-Lee, Paul Barron, Bob Metcalf, Bob Taylor, Louis Buzan, the list goes on. However, this heralded technology was preceded by much earlier thinkers, visionaries, who foresaw many aspects of today's globally connected world. Indeed, the vision of the internet had been articulated some years ago by a particular individual who said, and I'm going to paraphrase it, it will be possible for a businessman in New York to create a message and using a device no larger than a watch, no more expensive than a watch, to instantly launch that message across the ocean to his colleague in London, perhaps, or anywhere, and be able to send any picture, drawing, text, speech, instantly. That was Nikola Tesla in 1908. The vision was there. We didn't invent it. After him, H.G. Wells in 1938, Vannevar Bush in 1945, Licklider in 1960. The vision was marching along. It was going to happen. And in fact, it just had to wait for the technology to catch up. So, whereas we honor all of the pioneers of that period and more recently, none of us needed to have been born. None of us. And this would have happened. We just had to wait for the technology to catch up to the vision. We were lucky. Thank you. You make me cry. But it's an interesting thought. You should realize that. So my humble role in this came out of a lifelong pursuit of following my curiosity. That was mentioned more than once tonight. Following my curiosity and asking how and why do magical technologies work? The how is all about playing with, building, destroying, probing, experimenting, and testing gadgets to see how they work. The why is all about understanding why they behave that way. And for me, that led to physics and mathematics to offer the explanation and the understanding. And in my mind, there's enormous power in mastering the theoretical side of a problem and also gaining an intuitive grasp and understanding of the behavior of the system. That's a winning combination. Many successful computer scientists are excellent at one, but not necessarily the other. And to have both is truly powerful. Claude Shannon was a master at that, and he taught me some of the fine points of that approach. Happily, my own trajectory has always combined a rich mixture of theory and basically strong physical intuition. As you heard, it started with my discovery of the magic of radio. When as a young kid in elementary school, I was reading a Superman comic book. What else did you do in those days? And I happened to see plans for building a crystal radio, something called a crystal radio. And you could build it, as you were told, with free items in your Manhattan tenement apartment. Except I must admit, among other things, I stole the earphone from the candy store down the street. I studied electronics from a large library book I got and from the RCA receiving tube manual. Does anybody remember that? What a man, you ought to look it up. It taught you everything while selling you vacuum tubes. That trajectory continued as I enrolled as a CCNY college student, whereby I went to night school for my entire electrical engineering degree. Who goes to night school for an EE degree? Crazies, dropouts, poor, dedicated students, and GIs coming back from World War II. And those guys and gals, they knew what they wanted, as opposed to somehow the unfocused undergraduates. That maturity really matters. It does condition where you're going and why you're going there. All through college, I also worked as a full-time assistant electrical engineer in the daytime, working with seasoned engineers, building real-world systems. What an amazing and valuable experience. Then when I got to MIT, there was Claude Shannon promoting the same mixed approach I've been talking about: theoretical, mathematical mastery and intuitive physical understanding. That led me to choose as my PhD research problem, as you heard, the creation of a mathematical theory of computer networks. Here was a problem that was unmined, important, and for which I had an approach. And that approach was to introduce and use queuing theory as the main mathematical tool. This was a challenging theoretical endeavor enriched with real-world applications. From that to the ARPANET was a natural and gratifying progression, and you've heard enough about that. Now, at the 20th anniversary of the ARPANET, I wrote a homely poem glorifying the magnificence of queuing theory. And I hope you'll forgive me for torturing you with it herewith. The title is Ode to a Queue. Thank you. In the 20 years of funding, many fields has DARPA led, but the finest thing that they did bring was the analytic thread. By that I mean they nurtured quantitative research tools, and they always felt, for all their guilt, they got principles and rules. Indeed, a wealth of knowledge was uncovered and was new, and the common thread with which we led was the analytic queue. Now, a queue may have one server. If there's more than one, they form a team. Its dearest wish is just to fish in a quiet Poisson stream. If you want to model networks or a complex data flow, a queue's the key to help you see all the things you need to know. So the next time you feel lonely and wonder what to do, you'll soon feel fine if you join the line of an analytic queue. Thanks. Now, you just made a big mistake. You enjoyed that, I got another one. At another occasion, I tormented a similar audience to this particular with more verse, which I can't resist stating now, because as that tale tells, it tells of the early days of networking, and its final message is so appropriate for this occasion. Those early days were golden, and the challenges were huge. We could have taken shortcuts and create a frightful kludge, or we could have gotten patents to enrich our treasure chest, but instead we did it proper and succeeded in our quest. The packets, they went streaming, they went flying hop by hop. And when the gigapipes were full, was no way to stop. The flow control protect us as apps did quickly grow. The younger kids are now in charge. It's time that we let go. So in summary, nurture your curiosity by pursuing the how and the why, and thus master theoretical understanding while enriching your physical intuition. Then shoot for the moon, and if you get there, then get the heck out of there and pass it on to the next generation. Thank you very much.
You know, there's we're gonna ask all the fellows to join us up here, but I gotta tell you, there is this saying about history, and I think you nailed it, Professor. It's not about the past, it's about the present, having a conversation with the past. You go back to Tesla. It's so true, this very thoughtful presentation. Thank you so much for what you've done. So, here we go. As we close our program, we want to welcome the other awardees back on the stage for a moment, please, if we may.
Wonderful. Len, Dan, Adele, and Dawn, thank you for your lifetime of work and impact in computing, which has changed the world in so many positive ways. Thank you for your inspiring messages, including your one word of advice. Going forward, let us follow our fellows' advice to have unquenched curiosity that drives us to ask important questions, and in the face of unanticipated challenges and outcomes, to persevere.
And there's so many life experiences and the wisdom that each of you shared in the context of the word that you chose. This is a museum tradition that our honorees and guests choose a word and then an inspiring, ideally, story that will motivate younger people and the next generation to be thinking forward in the future. There's so much that you have presented in your words to inspire future generations. So we'd like to thank you for that. Great. Thank you.
Let's give a final round of applause.
Well, I want to thank everyone, and obviously this is a tremendous evening, and this is an opportunity for us to capture these moments. This is all part of our permanent collection in the archive, so you've witnessed the capturing of some amazing stories in honor of some amazing individuals and their contributions to the world that we all live in today. As you know, and I opened the program, our belief at the museum is that technological progress should be in service to human progress, and I think the demonstration in this ceremony tonight really amplified that. And we have a great opportunity with this class of 2022 fellows to reflect upon the motivations that drove each of them. And there's an interesting and amazing thread about the broader use of connecting people, learning systems, and empowering people to do well in the world. So we want to thank all of you for being with us tonight. And we'd like to encourage all of you to join us in working together to do our best to help and use technology to shape a better future. So with that in mind, you're all welcome. We have dessert and coffees downstairs, and look forward to networking and talking with all of you. So thanks for coming. We really appreciate it. Great. Thank you.